Okay, want to welcome you out today. We're going to talk a little bit about some of those ancestors of yours that can make you want to pull your hair out a little bit. We'll call this correctly identifying mysterious relatives and try to provide you with some ideas of how we can solve the problems of finding and identifying these people. We're going to focus on situations where the person being researched appears to be hiding from you, at least trying to keep their true identity away from you as the researcher. In other words, we're seeking the hard to identify relative. And we'll do this mainly through some research techniques that will be explored as we try to bring the truth to light. So the first thing we want to do is talk a little bit about we need to think about this problem as a genealogist would think about it. And of course, many of us are new to family history and we don't know a lot. And so to think like a genealogist is a challenge because we're not a genealogist. So here are some suggestions. The first thing is trust only after you've verified a fact. You may see a fact, but you still need to verify it. Having a fact, a date or a place or something like that, a relationship is one thing, but verifying it is a totally different thing that you need to do so that you have, a feeling that you've got the true facts in front of you. Learn to be a little skeptical or maybe very skeptical. Don't just take things at face value. And understand that all records can contain errors, sometimes deliberate, sometimes accidental. Even vital records have errors in them sometimes. The accuracy of a record can be compromised deliberately. And there's a lot of reasons for it. A simple couple of examples would be on age. Ages can be altered so that you can get married. And you can also alter an age so that a man usually would be able to either get into or stay out of the military, depending on what he's trying to do. And I've seen examples of both of those. Don't reinvent the wheel. In other words, what have others said about this situation? Sneak around, look around, and see if you can find other people that have approached the same problem. Now, just because they come up with a conclusion doesn't mean you're going to accept it at face value, because you're going to need to verify what they came up with. Another one is learn the history and social makeup of the area being researched so that you understand the dynamics of what it was like to live there and what would be a reasonable thing to happen and what wouldn't be a reasonable thing. And especially learn what records are available for that place and time. There's no sense looking for a birth certificate in a location where birth certificates didn't start for 75 years. You're just not going to find one. And try not to work with only a single record. That's a big problem a lot of us have. We find one thing and we build the whole person on that one record. And there's no way to really truly verify if it's accurate or not without finding other records to pair with it. And then periodically review your own research, because you might make mistakes, or you might just skip over something at the time you think isn't important. But later on, after you've learned a few other things, you find out is vitally important. So it never hurts to go back and review what you've done. So the bottom line is try not to get yourself into rabbit holes, as rabbit holes are hard to get out of once you're in them. Okay, another idea on this is that you need to think a little bit like a detective. This is why we've got Sherlock Holmes floating around in our presentation today, my favorite detective. So what you want to do is collect all the known information that you can find and record everything you learn. Use a research log or anything, but just write down what you found and start saving things so that you can put things back together in ways that make sense. Cross-reference all the known records. In other words, point to how they intersect with each other, how they verify things, across multiple records, how they introduce new thoughts, things like that. Don't leave stones unturned. Try to, uncover every stone you can. And things don't happen in a vacuum. So like we've said, study out the history and social world in the place where you're researching. And remember that everything you learn about this person needs to fit into the context of their family. It's not going to make any sense normally to have this person born in New England when the family lived and resided in England, let's say. It's possible, maybe they had a trip, maybe they were stationed over here for a while, but it needs to be put into context because normally that doesn't make a lot of sense. What have other researchers found out already? Remember, verify, don't just trust. Create a hypothesis and then try to prove or disprove it. But try to keep your hypothesis on, one thought and keep researching that one thought until you're satisfied that you've reached it. If your idea is you want a hypothesis on who you think are the parents of this person, then stick with that and don't get, run off into some other topic, maybe researching another sibling or starting to gather the kids for the family. If you're trying to find the parents, stick with searching for the parents until you've found them. And be willing to discard this hypothesis if you can't prove it or if it's proven to be false. A lot of times we get hooked into saying, okay, I think John and Mary are the parents. And even when you find evidence against it, you still want John and Mary to be the parents. You have to give it up. If it's disproven, move on with the new hypothesis. Okay, when problems do occur and you're not getting results, then maybe you do need to spread things out and widen your search base. And instead of focusing just on the problem person, consider trying to see what you can find out about that person through the records of their spouse, their children, their parents, their siblings. Often the clues for your person will be found in the records of others. Vital records, obituaries, naturalization, travel records, and many other kinds of records will often provide information of other relatives. So the bottom line is, if you dig deep enough and you find enough sources, then piece them together properly and look at the big picture that you've created, the truth is usually going to come to light. And that's what we're hoping that we can help you to do today. So what we'll do with the rest of this presentation is show you some examples that try to show you this in action. You get a feel for what we're talking about. So we'll start with Mary Ann Drury. And this is Mary Ann Drury from a descendancy report and family search. And when I first looked at it, I said, there's something wrong here. Sarah, Ellen, and John are the couple. And then these are their children. Mary Ann, born in 1889, and then Helen in 1903, and George in 1905. And that kind of makes me wonder because, we're talking about 14 years or so between Mary Ellen and Helen. And Mary Ann, I should say, has a different last name. So there's something not right here. We can start making assumptions, but we need to know for sure what's going on. According to this, Mary Ann is supposedly my fifth cousin twice removed. So she's not a real distant cousin. It's not real close, but not really that far back. Okay, so the first thing I did is I wrote everything down that we knew, the main things down that we knew. So we've got the couple, John Martin Weipert and Sarah Ellen Foltz, but we don't have a death or marriage date. So that's the first thing we want to try to find out is, when were they married? And that way we can find out if Mary Ann's their child, or could she be just Sarah's child and another husband? Or is she maybe adopted or whatever. The other thing was really made things stand out right away is how little we know about Mary Ann Drury compared to the other children in this family. She got placed in this family, but boy, there isn't much information to back her up. So she's kind of an unknown person right now. So we're going to start by finding out what can we find out from her sources? Well, actually, from her source, because she's a one source person. And this is Mary Ann's source, the 1930 census. And the first thing I noticed is looking over in the column for age at first marriage for the parents, that John didn't get married till he was 44 years old. He's 64 now. That would be 20 years ago. Well, Mary Ann is 41 years old. Now, it's very possible that he could have been her father. He would have been 23. But he only married 20 years ago for the first time, supposedly. So that kind of eliminates him. Ella, on the other hand, is 64. Her first marriage was 21 years ago. And so that leaves you with some, I should say her age at marriage was 21. So that makes, she married when she was 43. And so it's very possible, that she could, it was 43 years earlier, that she could very well be the mother of Mary Ann, but we don't know yet. We know that Mary Ann married at the age of 16 and as a very young age, and she has one child, Yvonne, who's 10 years old, that we see on the census. Okay, and we know that Mary Ann's a widow, and so Drury is very possibly her married name, because generally when women became widows, they just carried that married name with them as they went on. And Yvonne has Drury as a last name too. So probably to keep things simpler, they just left it that way. Okay, so when she married at the age of 16, that would have been about 1905, and it's very possible that she's Yvonne's mother. Okay, so let's look at family search. First thing I did is I went to look at family search for Mary Ann Drury and really didn't find anything that would help me. And that's not surprising. It seems like that happens quite a bit, especially when you're looking for a woman and we really are using her married name, because we're not sure what her maiden name was, but it's most likely not Weipert. So I'm going to do my favorite thing. I'm going to turn to Ancestry and use some of their AI power. And so we'll go over to Ancestry by going on her person page at Family Search under Search Records and say, let's go to Ancestry. They'll provide us with a list of things. And now there could be some things here that would be very helpful. I see a death record. I see marriage records. Right now, my goal is to find out who are her parents. And I want to make sure that I'm really working on her. And so the thing I'm going to do is begin by going to the record that I know was her, which is that 1930 census. And we're going to see, we already know what the census says. I want to see the records that they tie to that census that they say are her and go from there first. Okay, remember, we're seeking her parents. Well, in that list, among other records that all look very interesting about her, is an obituary. And so I clicked on that, and lo and behold, this obituary spells out virtually everything we need to know for our problem. It says she's the widow of Robert E. Drury. So now we know who Mr. Drury is. And she was born on the 13th of June, 1889 in Chambersburg, Florida, or Pennsylvania. She was the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. John Hamburg. We don't know if Mrs. Hamburg's the mother that she was living with, but most likely probably is. And she married the 1st of February, 1906 in North Dakota. And then they had moved to Forsyth, and talks about survivors, her sister, Helen Anderson, a brother, George Weipert, both of Forsyth, and 2 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren. So the Weipert name is in there, and Helen is one of those children, but they're not really her full siblings. They're either half siblings or step siblings, depending on how the situation works out. But we know her maiden name now is Hamburg. And we have an absolute birth date and we have an absolute marriage date, at least from what the census says, or what the obituary says. So we went looking further, and on the 1920 census, sure enough, here she is, Mary, with Robert E. Drury. This is the only census that we ever find them together. Unfortunately, Mr. Drury died young, and there isn't an 1890 census, so we couldn't find that for them. And there's no, well, there's 1900 census, but we never have been able to find either Robert or Mary on the 1900 census. But we have this 1921 where Yvonne had just been born. She was 5 months old. And it shows them very well. So we've pretty well got the family settled now. We know who her husband was, who's the father of Yvonne, and that she was actually married to him, as it shows it on the census. Now, started looking at those other records to see if it would pin down anything about who her parents were with more detail. And she has a later marriage. In fact, she ends up having 3 marriages. And this is, or excuse me, 4 marriages. No, 3 marriages. This is marriage number 3, which doesn't happen until 1952. But you'll notice over on the right column, Mary Ann Drury, still using that name as her name when she got married. Gives her birth date, which was the same, Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. She's divorced, and I remember seeing a divorce listed in those records that went with the census when we first looked at her. This is marriage 3. Her father's name is John Hamburg, and her mother's name is Sarah Ellen Foltz. So Sarah Ellen was her mother, and those other kids that are Weiperts are her half siblings because they're children by Sarah and Mr. Weipert. So if you piece all these things together, you get a pretty good picture of what makes up this family. Now, here's another problem, and it goes with that same basic family. We're over in the mother's family, the Foltz family, and when I looked at them, I thought, oh, now we've got a problem over here. Maybe. Because there's a Sarah Ellen Foltz, born in 1864, and an Ella T. Foltz Binkley, which I assume is her married name, born in 1864. They have different death dates, so they probably are not the same person. And I thought, what is going on here? So I did a little, let's do a comparison thing. So for the Sarah Ellen, We have her birth date in 1864, and we know that she died in Montana in 1948. She's the one that married John Hamburg, and then after he died, she married Mr. Weipert. And then in 1952, she marries the other gentleman that we just saw the marriage certificate for. And John Hamburg's the father of Ellen Hamburg Drury that we've been talking about. And so at this point, these hadn't been put together yet. And so I made a note to myself that we were going to have to take this John, and tie him to Sarah Ellen Foltz. Now, what about Ella T? Is she really Sarah Ellen, just another name? Are these twins or what? Well, turns out that Ella T is really Ella T. Hamburg Binkley. She was born somewhere around March of 1864. She doesn't die until 1970, and she dies in Franklin, Pennsylvania. She doesn't leave Pennsylvania. So she's obviously a different person. What you're seeing in this column is a result of quite a bit of research. It turned out that we found her parents, and they're a Franklin Hamburg and a Sarah Fieser. So apparently somebody got confused and must have confused her with Sarah Ellen and Ella, and decided they were the same person. And that person put her over in the Christian Foltz family when she really doesn't belong in that family. She's actually a Hamburg. And so she marries Melchior Binkley. And so what we need to do is move her out of that family and disconnect her from John Hamburg, who they had connected her to, so that he was showing married to Sarah Ellen and Ella T. And so, this is the way you work these sort of things. You don't make guesses. You try to find actual documentation. And we found the marriage record for her. We found her on censuses. And so we know this is really who she is, and that they aren't the same person. In fact, they're not even sisters, but they both have Hamburg ties. It was so confusing that I had to draw this thing out to work on it, because every time I turned around, I was running into Hamburgs. And it was really confusing that Ella T wasn't really a Hamburg or a Foltz, but that she had been kind of grafted into that family. It was so confusing that I had to draw this thing out to keep myself straight. So that's an example of what you might need to do, hopefully neater than I did, to keep these things, lined up right. Okay, another example is in my Lehman family, the German family, the family of Adam and Magdalena Lehman. And they have a whole slew of kids. In fact, they have 6 kids that have descendants, at least have a spouse and maybe children. And then 5 other children that don't show any spouses. And for some of them, like the Elizabeth there, she only lived to be age 15. So she probably didn't marry. But then we have a bunch of children, a Daniel, a David, a Wilhelm, a Maria, that have no death dates. They just have birth dates. And so this is a family that's not really well developed. And so this is what it looks like over on Family Search on the person page for Daniel. And so I decided, well, let's start by kind of focusing in on Daniel and see what we can do. But then I had the thought that, he's only got that birth date and nothing else. What can we do? We're in a difficult time period, because things like the 1850 census are down the road a ways. Some of these kids may still be in the home. Adam's dead by 1850. So maybe Magdalena has some of the children living with her, but she's probably not going to have the early children in this family. It's really hard to verify that these kids are her kids because there's not going to be a lot of opportunity to see them all in the home, in the same home. So let's look first at the father's sources anyway to see what we've got there. So I went to Adam's sources. He does have a birth source that verifies his birth. He's got a find a grave source that verifies his death. And he has three sources for birth records for three of his children, for Maria, for Margaret, and Samuel. So that's a good start. But it doesn't really guarantee us that all the rest of those children are his. And so the thought came to my mind, now that we have AI tools, could we find maybe a will for Adam? And so we went to the full text search, went over to labs from the homepage at Family Search, clicked on experiments, and went to full text search. And then in the results, we filtered it by state to Pennsylvania and then to County Cumberland, because this is the county they lived in. And there were 43 results, and the very first one was an 1845 will for Adam Lehman. That's the year he died. That's most likely his will. So we said, bingo, let's look at it. What children are going to be named there? Well, here's the will. And this shows you a good example of some of the problems that pop up. Will's very good. It names people. It names his wife, Magdalena. When it gets down to the kids, instead of doing it child by child, he kind of lumps them together with some real sloppy punctuation. So he talks about bequeathing to his beloved children, to wit, John Adam, comma, Daniel David, comma, Mary, Sarah, comma, Margaret, and Samuel. And then later on, he does mention my son Daniel, but is it Daniel David? Or is that just Daniel and David's a different child? It's kind of hard to tell. And then he says there shall be paid out of his share, except for Daniel, who's going to have paid out of his share extra money that's going to go to wit to John Adam, David, Mary, Sarah, Margaret, and Samuel. You know, if he had put the commas in, we would be very sure what exactly he's saying. Things don't always line up. And so it's a little bit of a problem, even though we've got the names, it's still kind of a question at times. Is John Adam really one person? Or is there really two? So you really can't tell here. So we thought, well, maybe mother had a will when she died. And lo and behold, Magdalena actually had a will. When you have a family that has some resources and they live quite a while, oftentimes you'll find the mother or the survivor leaving a will. The wife lives longer. And so in this case, she does the basic thing. She directs for her burial and so on. In fact, she says she wants to be interred in the English burial ground or graveyard in the borough where they lived until such time as they could set up their own cemetery. So she was going to be buried with her husband and daughter Elizabeth, who had already died. And then when this cemetery was set up for them, then she wanted the remains moved to the new cemetery for the husband, for Elizabeth and her. Then she went through the way you're supposed to do it and have item 1, item 2, item 3. And so the first one was to her daughter, Sarah Ann Sever. And then there's 3 daughters. And you notice Sarah Ann, we get her married name. Another daughter is Mary Magdalena Fishburne, so we get her married name. Sarah Ann Sever again, and Margaret Jane Bradley. We get her last name. Then we get the rest of the kids. One of the children mentioned was a son, John Lehman. Next one was a son, Adam Lehman. So see, they're 2 different people. Then the son, Daniel F. Lehman. A son, David Lehman. Another son, Samuel B. Lehman. This was written in 1864 and probated in 1871 after she had died in 1870. Love having these wills, as it really helps for a time period that's hard to pin things down real well. This really helps to spell things out. So now we can look at the 1850 census for the family, where Magdalena is in fact at the head of the household in South Middleton Township, where the family had resided. And with her are Mary M., born 1827, Sarah A., 1828, Margaret I., 1830, Samuel B., 1834, and Daniel F., a little out of order, 1820. Then there are 2 other children there. There's an Andrew J., and he's actually the son of Adam. We traced him down, and he's actually Adam's son. And Willis F., we still don't know who in the heck he is. Somebody had just had him, and there are girls in that family that could possibly be the mother, since they're called Lehman. I mean, it could be a child of one of the boys, but more than likely it's a child of one of the girls born out of wedlock. He'd never have been able to pin him down. But having the wills and this, we now can start piecing together the family fairly comfortably. So now, is a Daniel F. Lehman already in the tree? That's a good question. Now that we know a little more about him, we know that he was born about 1820. He has the initial F. Well, we find him in trees. So one of the things we can do is we can go over and look at similar people in family search. You'd be surprised how often this helps. And this is what we found. The first Daniel's the one we're using. This is the guy that's in our record in the home of Adam and Magdalena. But he hasn't got any parents. We don't have a death date. We don't have a full birth date. Then there's a Daniel F. Lehman, which has got the right initial. He's actually born in 1818, according to their records, in Cumberland County, which is the same county. Dies in 1892, which would help explain why we can't find many records on him, because that's kind of a dead time period. But it shows he was married and had several children. So upon doing a little more research, we found that he actually lived in South Middleton. And so since he's living in the exact same town, he's got the right name, he's got the right birth date, we came to the conclusion that these 2 men needed to be merged together. And that helped clean up the record and family search. And it brought a whole new family into this particular line because Daniel F. had no parents showing. Okay. So the final result looks something like this. Daniel F's now reasonably identified. He's connected in thanks to the wills. The children are more accurately established. Yet this family is still far from finished. We still need to work on people like David and Margaret and Wilhelm, and there's, Sarah A. And there's more people that still have work that needs to be done because they're not all finished. but we're heading in the right direction. Okay, one last problem that I ran across just the other day was in this Coleman family, where they had an Edward and an Eleanor Coleman, both born supposedly in 1874. There's also another Eleanor in this family born late, because it's like 7 years after the last known child before her, that she's born in 1895, and trying to wonder what's going on here. Okay, and these is again as a family where several of the children are not fully developed yet. I have two censuses, and the transcriptions show this. The 1880 census says that the child born in 1874 is Edward, and there's no Eleanor listed. In the 1900 census, according to the transcript, there's a child born in 1874, December of 1874, whose name is Eleanor, but there's no Edward. So what's going on? Well, you need to look at the actual records and not rely on transcripts. This is the thinking like a genealogist and being a detective, because what it actually shows on the 1900 census is Eleanor N. born December 1874, age 5. And she's in the birth order that would make her age 5. And so that's probably accurate. And the only thing I can think of is the children that were in the home at that time were all born in the 1870s. And the census taker just inadvertently put a 7 in there and made it 74 instead of 94, because the age is very clear. There's no question about that. Also, the mother Margaret stated that she was the mother of 7 and 5 were living. Well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 8 kids listed here. So there's a problem. We know that one dead child is Sarah up here. Whoops. Is Sarah up here because she died in 1876. So that accounts for 1. And we have 2 children named Eleanor. If we take this Eleanor and merge her with the Eleanor in 1895, that would give us the right number of children. And Edward would probably, since we have death dates on most of the others, all the others, Edward would be by default the other deceased child. So that's our hypothesis. So we went a little further. Here's the actual census. You can see how it says Eleanor N. born in December. That's a DEC. That's a what looks like an R. It's a German E. So December 1874, which is probably really 1894, age 5. Now, how do I know that it's really 1894 or 5? Well, we finally found a record that shows her birth. And this is from Los Angeles. And it was a birth record for Eleanor Margaret Coleman. Father's name William, mother's Margaret Catherine Wyman, and her birth was the 2nd of December, 1895 in Los Angeles. And so that cleared up when she was born for sure. And knowing that, we went ahead and merged her with the Eleanor that was in the family that showed approximately the right age. So, conclusion, carefully study out confusing situations and gather all the records you can, and then sift them and try to bring everything together And hopefully once you do that, your answers will start floating to the surface and you'll be able to resolve many of your problems. Just something that takes a little extra time, extra digging. This one was kind of fun though, because you really get a feel for the family by doing this, and you feel really like you've accomplished something when you do resolve these problems. So good luck in your searching. I want you to remember again that we use a YouTube channel. And if you like this presentation, please, since you're viewing it on YouTube, like it. That helps get the word out to other people. And if you're interested, subscribe, and you'll receive notices when we post other presentations, usually about every 2 weeks or so. You'll find buried on the channel description a little blue link here. And that blue link is to a blog that we hold. And the main purpose for it is to provide you with links to PDF documents, one for each of these presentations, that has all the slides if you're interested in seeing the slides themselves. You're welcome to do whatever you want with them. So we appreciate you being here today. Good luck in your searching, and we'll see you again soon.